Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello! I forgot you were going to do that. So, in case you couldn't get it from that context clue, today we're going to talk about Mrs. Doubtfire. Nobody knew I was going to do that but Hannah, and she forgot. So you're getting a real-time reaction from us today.
Oh, boy. We have this starting hot. This is like the Halloween episode.
Yep.
Started with the Dr. Loomis read.
Yes. So, yeah, today we're going to talk about Mrs. Doubtfire. Really briefly, it is about a man who goes through he's going through a divorce from his wife and gets his basically parental rights very minimized. And so in a reaction to that, he decides it's a good idea to dress up like a Scottish nanny and to go in under that disguise and to spend time with his children as a Scottish nanny until that obviously blows up in his face. So that's the premise we're working off of today. We also have a guest with us, Dr. Amanda Rios. She's from CORE, the Center of Relational Empowerment. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and a divorce mediator. So she's going to be a great adage to this episode. And if you want to introduce yourself, to say hi.
I'm Dr. Rios. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited about being here. This is such a great movie to talk about some of the things that I think about on a regular basis as a psychologist and MFT.
Yeah, of course. We're so glad to have you. So the topics we're going to discuss today is, number one, the dynamic between Miranda and Daniel. So that's the Sally Field and Robin Williams characters, which we're probably going to call Sally and Robin for the majority of this discussion.
Probably.
Agreed. And then we're going to talk about the impact of their relationship and dynamic on the kids in question. And then we're also going to talk about resourcing as our last topic of discussion. And then, as always, we're going to do treatment and final thoughts. So I think right away in this movie, you see the dynamic between Robin Williams, I'm already saying it, Robin and Sally, which is
Daniel and Miranda.
Daniel Miranda. So right away, the movie jumps into the birthday party scene. So right away, you see like a very big version, inflated version of their roles, which is, I think you put it really great, Dr. Rios, before we started, so I can throw to you.
Yeah, I think, it's such an interesting dynamic. And actually, even though it's a movie, obviously it's really embellished.
Yeah.
But I think most couples have dynamics like this, right? In a relational pattern amongst couples, you'll see somebody in the relationship ends up being super responsible, really, organized and things like that. Obviously, in the movie, that's Miranda, Sally, whatever you want to call her. And Daniel, Robin Williams, is the sort of more spontaneous, fun-loving, like sort of irresponsible person. And so we end up with this really extreme overfunctioner and underfunctioner dynamic. And those dynamics are, it's sort of cyclical, right? So the more that she's really responsible, she's the breadwinner technically in this family. The more she's responsible, the more she wants rules and structure, the more it pushes him to be the opposite in a lot of ways. And so I think he'll underfunction in terms of responsibility, but then he, sort of is the fun dad. Mm-hmm. And the kids obviously love him for that. Like, he throws this huge party, which is super irresponsible if we're thinking as adults. But, from a kid's perspective, it's like what they need. They need spontaneity. They need to be able to have fun and let go and let loose. And so a lot of couples actually, even in healthy relationships, end up in one of these dynamics. One might be overfunctioning, one might be underfunctioning. So I think, from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. and they end up in these extreme roles.
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying, which we touch upon a lot in this podcast, is that we're obviously dealing with movies. So a lot of things that we see and that we discuss on this podcast are like inflated versions. And exactly what you're speaking to. Because right away in this party, he just impulsively quit his job and then rents out a farm.
A petting zoo. He's a petting zoo.
Petting zoo.
It comes off like a farm.
In the middle of a San Francisco street.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, like total chaos in this home that then the
For sure.
wife's walking into. So yeah, like definitely what you're speaking to, which is, and she brings it up too, Miranda, like several times in the movie. I think they have their big fight in the beginning, like right after the party, which I actually thought was a really well written fight in terms of like her frustrations and then his kind of cluelessness.
Right.
Or I don't know if it's like true cluelessness or like denial cluelessness of like, what are you talking about? And why didn't you tell me? And like almost like that learned helplessness around like, I can't deal, I never deal. And so like, I don't really look at these hard truths.
Right. And he's having so much fun that he like doesn't necessarily always know when it is time to be serious. Right. I thought there was one quote I remember that Miranda said, Sally Fields. I don't know which now that you introduced it that way. I don't know which one to call them.
Literally whatever you want to say.
But there's one thing that she had said, which is like, I used to think that Danny could do anything except be serious, but I was serious enough for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's sort of her recognition of like, I was the serious one. That was my role. And for Daniel, he didn't have to be, and he didn't, and the kids I think need both, right? But then it turns out into when that happens in this dynamic, it turns into Miranda being basically, when I think about structural systems work, right? I think about Miranda's like in the parental subsystem when he should be there with her. But instead, he's kind of with the kids in this like sibling subsystem. Like, you can keep this secret from me. You can kind of
like we're in this together.
Yeah. So, so for her to be in that parental subsystem, the kids end up having to do things that they wouldn't have to do normally, like tell their dad to do something different. So,
or recognize that. Dad is actually putting them in a position where he's going to get in as much trouble as they are for his ideas, and they have to monitor his impulsiveness.
Right.
In order to keep the dynamic in the home between mom and dad healthy and not add extra stress. And you see that when his son looks at him and he has this Robin Williams weight of the world look on him of party's over.
Right. Yeah. And it's like disappointment and all of that. Like they have to keep him in check, like, which makes them mini adults. Right.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the kids later probably, but I think it's all related to sort of that, the way the parents interact with each other, really leads to how the kids interact with each other and with the parents. Yeah. They set the tone.
Yeah. Well, exactly what you're saying about because of their dynamic, if he is kind of more of one of the kids, I would also imagine what is added, like, I would imagine resentment for Sally is that the loneliness of that too, of like, I'm a single parent and it's worse because I'm not supposed to be a single parent. At least when I would imagine, because I'm not married or divorced, but that once she is divorced and single, kind of feeling like, okay, but I know I'm a single parent and I've made that decision. So it feels maybe even less lonely than being in a relationship with someone who's supposed to be your partner.
Agreed, 100%. Like in that dynamic, when people are divorcing, they, typically one person is initiating it, even if both people really want the divorce, but one person really initiates that. And, which leads to a whole other thing for the partner that's being left, essentially. There's a lot of feelings there that I think are really difficult to, to work through. But I think when one person sort of says, I'm alone already, so like, why do I need to have this relationship anymore? Because I'm essentially alone. In my parenting responsibilities, I might as well go do this on my own, And not just alone, but having a very chaotic kid
older
Sure.
kid.
Yeah, it's
that I don't
it's
have
a lot
to deal
more
with, that I could give
responsibility,
away.
right? Because I think if we're not looking at in movie time and we're looking in real life time with couples who are experiencing things like this with this dynamic, you're looking at her stance of I can't really get him to do what he needs to do, and I'm also trying to maybe save face because I know maybe structurally that he should be in this role, and I don't want the kids to think badly of him. But and so how do I manage trying to bring him up to where I'm at in our roles while also needing to scold him for doing the things that he shouldn't do anyway, like throw a party with barn animals in the living room.
Or completely undermine mom's punishment for bad grades
Exactly.
in secret.
Right. That's a really good point.
It kind of makes me think of, and I'm interested in your guys' take on this, or if you've even heard of it, but I'm deep into TikTok. It's my second home. And a phrase I've been hearing a lot in like videos that are coming up on my For You page is the term like strategic incompetence or weaponized incompetence. And so I wonder if that's, in people listening to us, if that's a phrase people are getting more familiar with. And I think he demonstrates sort of what my understanding of that term is, which is because it feeds into this system that you're talking about, Dr. Rios, which is I don't know how to do it. And like maybe part of me is intentionally or even subconsciously acting like I don't have to do it because I've learned that if I do it so badly that I won't have to do it at all. Which I think sometimes you see in like younger people, like kids too, of like, I can't, like when you try to teach a kid something and they get really frustrated and they just want to act like they can't do it. Like almost when kids like dead drop on you because they want you to take over responsibility. It's sort of like it's almost like a behavior that some people haven't grown out of or that they regress back into when they're in a dynamic that they decide to do that in.
Well, and I feel like when I work with couples, that a part of what I see is that they have tried in the past and that they do one thing unlike what their partner would do, and their partner thinks like gives them a lot of heavy criticism about like, well, that's not how I would have done it, or you should have really done it this way because blah 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 blah. And so then what you end up seeing is the partner who is under functioning gets exacerbated,
fine, you do it then.
Exactly,
kind of, yeah.
Exactly. Well, because they have this feeling of, well, I can't do anything right anyway, so why should I try? Which kind of goes with that, but has a lot more to do with the dynamic of, I want the chance to do this. I want to be able to create this different relationship with my children, or I want to be able to take on this role, but when I try, even like a millimeter, when I try, I get criticized so much that it's hard to have the energy to want to try again. And also because then it's like, and then it's a fight. And then we're in a fight, and then now we're fighting again, and then the fight lasts 3 days. Like the part of the feeling so not exacerbated, I'm saying the wrong word.
I don't know if that's not the wrong word.
Well, that's usually though when things get worse, but I'm thinking more of just like being so frustrated. Yeah. So frustrated and again, feeling stuck or even feeling trapped of but it doesn't fucking matter what I do.
Yeah.
Either way.
I'm wrong. Well, and also like you see people fail to read the personality type of their partner in these situations too, because you see Robin's character is very, very clearly an ENFP type personality. He has it, all over him.
Okay.
I'm only laughing because I get so impressed by how I can't even remember my own personality type, and that you can like watch it. I could probably figure out his astrology sign though.
Yeah. 100%.
I'm sure you could.
But I hear what you're saying, because, well, continue. Sorry.
But you see him, and you see partners often will walk into the house and they'll often almost issue a quiz. Oh, well, what did you do while I was gone? And did you do the thing that we were supposed to do? And if there's any variance from the way that they were doing it, like Hannah was talking about, that can come with like an immediate criticism, which when you're dealing, especially with someone who's an ENFP performer type person, like this character is, he thrives on getting feedback, getting positive adulation, getting told he did a good job. He's an actor. Everything he does is for that applause. Like, it's almost like from Gladiator when you go like, you'll begin to love them for that, and they will love you for that cheer and adulation. Would you prefer it to be Batman?
No.
Hannah's rolling her eyes at me and
You're fine.
mean mugging me.
Keep talking.
Oh, I'm
You're
fine.
fine.
Am I fine? Like Bruce Wayne is fine because that's.
No, but I hear what you're.
Yeah. What you recognize is that when you come in immediately and crush someone's accomplishment, even if it's not perfectly done the way you want it to be, they had a good day with the kids. Everything is done. Everything is happened exactly the way that it should, with some variance from the way that the other parent would do it. But if it comes with that immediate criticism, that's going to shut the other person down. And I don't think I saw any weaponized incompetence in Robin. This character is too impulsive. I didn't see him be like crafty enough to really figure out the like weaponized side of it. It might be in their dynamic if we saw more of it, but since it's a comedy, we don't see all of the ins and outs. But what we do see is Robin's so impulsive that like, I don't think the weaponized side of it, but I think the exasperated side of it, of like I'll just do what I'm good at, and then, I can't win anyway, like you guys are saying. So if I can't win anyway, maybe I'll just do the thing that I'm good at and lean into it and be fun dad.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying really resonates with me too when I think about the dynamic. We said overfunctioner, underfunctioner, but there's another dynamic in a couple's relationship called pursue withdraw. Right. So, and pursue seems like, it's like when you get hugs and kisses from your partner, it can be like holding their hand. It could be, hey, let's go do this activity together. It's pursuit of the relationship. Right. But sometimes it can also be checking in. Did you do this? Did you do that? And it sounds like criticism. Usually that's stuff about whatever the person's coming home from a long day and they're just like kind of organizing themselves, right? But it can lead to that pursue withdraw dynamic where the other partner withdraws because they feel incompetent. And maybe he gets lost in his fantasy world of like, let me just be this version of myself because that's all I'm competent at. And so, if I'm an actor, I'm fun loving, I'm just going to be in that role. And so the more that he's in that role, the more she pursues and the more that he withdraws into that fantasy world in some ways. And so again, that the more that either of them is in one of those positions, it leads again to that circular dynamic constantly. And so I really was resonating with what you were saying in that way.
And I also wonder too, because I think we fall victim to, which we do a lot in talking about movies on this podcast, of we only see like a window of this relationship. So we only see kind of what you guys have been referencing is we don't see what's led up to this point. We just see the blow up and the divorce and then the fallout of that. We don't really see like, have they had conversations where they've tried to get to more of a middle ground? Because it does seem like when they have that fight in the kitchen where she finally says, I want a divorce, he seems truly like maybe they've never had a talk about it or never had like or maybe she's never real said talk, an overt talk about it. Maybe she's done a lot of that like testing that I think we sometimes all do of like, I'm going to not do dishes for 3 days and see if they finally do dishes. Yeah. And then on the 4th day, I'm going to be super pissed. I'm not going to really talk about it. Maybe a little passive aggressive, maybe fight about something totally different. And then I'll do the dishes. And then it just keeps going like that.
Divorce doesn't happen just in we've had a fight, right?
We've had it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's really, sometimes it takes many, many years to lead to the point of like, okay, I'm going to file for divorce. Yeah. Right. So typically it starts with like one of the partners feels a little like disillusionment. And then, that could last, sometimes years, maybe like 1 or 2 years. And then they start saying things about it. They might start expressing dissatisfaction in the relationship. And that could be for a little while. And then they go into, the decision to divorce, right? Which even once she said it in the kitchen, right, that it took, I mean, in the movie, it took like 2 seconds before they were before a court, but that doesn't happen in real life. You know, it might take a couple of years depending on if they're, you know, what are they mediating? What are they, you know, going into in terms of what they're needing? What, you know, you don't just sit before a judge the second that you decide you're going to get divorced.
It was a pretty quick and clean divorce proceedings.
Well, I think just in general in California, in the state of California, divorce is very complicated, and literally can take years and years. I mean, I think it took I have someone that I know, it took them like 5, 6, 7 years for them to finalize. They had children. So it's just different. It's different in every state. But yeah, that piece of it is
movie magic.
Yeah.
Oh, it's for sure movie magic. Divorce it takes. You know, I think in Illinois they make people separate for a year, don't they, before they'll do it? Or is it?
There's just a few states that do that. You have to have legal separation.
I don't know that in Illinois you have to do that necessarily. There's a lot of changes in the divorce process too. Like what was interesting in watching the movie again after many years, because it had been a while since I'd seen it. But what was interesting is there was really not a lot of discussion, maybe it was all behind the scenes, of like what was going to happen in terms of the legal representation and what are the rights and all of that. And, you know, obviously in a divorce situation, you would do a lot of consultation. Now, I mean, the fact that I'm a divorce mediator, I mean, that is becoming even more popular as an option for couples who really want to put their kids first and not their own interests. And, you know, the mediation process really can be really powerful because it's making a decision as the parents on what is best for your family. And yes, you can kind of incorporate advice from lawyers, but really the idea is let's make a decision on really what works for us and then go to a judge or go with your lawyers to make it into a legal document, right? It's let's decide first outside of the court, then let the court know what we're doing. And in this situation, it doesn't seem like they really were going to go down that path at all. It was a little bit more, you know, but I also think it's a sign of the times back when the movie was made. Like, I think it was very much like that in a lot of ways. They didn't really have this more collaborative divorce process. I don't know if it would have worked for them as a couple. She was pretty set on just like, you are irresponsible, you're cut out, you know, and that's kind of how it is. And I think if it was, and he was also not interested in the divorce. So also that might have led to have them having an extreme experience as well.
She definitely seemed like she's finally made the choice to live her life and not be like beholden to him and his behavior anymore. And so wanting to like put that distance in that moment of like, I'm finally ready to do my own thing. And I know one thing also that I was remarking upon when watching it, and I'm interested in your guys' perspective as well, is when he decides to become Mrs. Doubtfire, he does excel at all of the things that like really damage their relationship. Like he's suddenly can figure out how, I mean, he fucks it up in the beginning, but like by lighting his boobs on fire, but like, you know, figuring out household chores.
I think if I spontaneously developed boobs, I would light them on fire too. So.
You have to figure out where they are at all times.
It takes a while to figure out how to walk around with them.
Right. I mean,
and you're not connected, so you can't actually feel. Yeah. So you can't. It's almost like you can't have awareness of it for a while. You
don't have tit depth perception.
Yes,
I do
exactly.
not. I really don't. And you know, so I think watching him like stumble through that was one of the like little gems of comedy in this movie that I think Robin Williams' physical style delivered so well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, so he like figures out the household stuff and does it really well. He's also, I think, what was most striking to me upon watching it as this time as an adult and like a therapist is he also takes such a different role with the kids. He's right away, he is very more loving, like gentle parenting, but very firm. You know, like, we aren't watching Dick Van Dyke. We're going to do homework. You don't like, in a way that he really didn't seem to be able to take that role when he was in his marriage, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, he had to run counter to Fun Dad. He had to play a role, and act as if he was a disciplinarian, tight ship running British nanny, and he had to incorporate that role spontaneously into this new identity, and in doing so he was able to demonstrate to himself that he could actually do this, and that the kids would respond, and that they could still develop affection and a positive relationship even if he was instituting boundaries and rules. And I think that as Fun Dad, he could not fathom that he probably thought that if I become more like Mom and become more like this, then I'm going to lose the relationship that I have with them, and we're not going to be as close anymore. And that probably generated a lot of anxiety, why he didn't develop that role of, balanced parenting.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that once he was living separately and really had to consider, okay, wow, how did I mess this up? And what can I do to show that I am? And even if it was sort of an act, it wasn't really an act because he had the skill set, right? He didn't have to go read books about how to be a parent. He just was able to do it because he knew that he was just functioning alone at that point. And so, he was in the character, but and this is where I think a lot of couples have a hard time recognizing the dynamic of the relationship really matters because, each partner has the ability. I mean, she had the ability to have fun too, like it wasn't like she was just serious all the time, but she was a little more free once she was out of that dynamic and she was allowed to kind of play both parts. And so was he. He was able to sort of step up and recognize and fill in the gaps. And so I think, a lot of people really have a hard time recognizing in their partners their capacity for it. And he probably didn't recognize it himself until he was given the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a part of what I see is helping the over-functioning person in the couple realize that you don't have to be responsible for your partner's actions and behaviors. And that when the over-functioner does that, that's why he gets put next to the kids. Because the over-functioning person in the relationship, so like Miranda, doesn't give... he doesn't have a chance to do any of these things. And so he gets put to the side, which means now I'm responsible for everything you do and the actions that you take and the way that you respond. And now I have to be worried if you act like a maniac when we go out in public. I have to be worried that you can't tell, don't know what time we need to go home. Part of what she is released of is the responsibility for his actions that she just took on. That he didn't ask and didn't need, but that because this over-functioning goes it's really hard for somebody to just be a little bit over-functioning. Once they're in it, it's the whole, it's really hard for it to not to be the whole deal, which again gets connected to, I also have responsibility for your behaviors and actions.
Yeah, which it's fascinating to watch them have to both balance the roles that they both have to play, because we do see Miranda we see little glimpses of it in the movie. We see her starting to loosen up and show some fun and realize that when she doesn't have to overcompensate, that the fun parts of her personality can shine through. And she also realizes her kids need that from her to replace what's lost from having Dad in the house being like that. That without an energy like that, without that energy bomb of a person, the kids are used to, they're probably going to have quite a hard time adjusting to someone just going around, did you do your stuff? Is your homework done? Please relieve the stress from my life because I'm used to being parental robot. And we see her start to liven up, and I mean, probably, getting James Bond as a boyfriend doesn't hurt, but.
Yeah. And then you can also see her kind of almost discomfort with then being engaged with a man who is an adult, and how he
but also who she views as an adult.
Yes. And so kind of approaching her and he's a functioning person. And so her kind of, it was interesting to watch her try to navigate someone who isn't in that dynamic she's used to.
Right. Even, it flipped on her.
Yeah.
Because he's so wealthy and like was coming to her under the guise of a client, and like watching her kind of have to switch out of like customer service mode and like almost fangirl mode a little bit into like realizing, oh no, he's here to hit on you.
And
like,
also,
this is not this is a date. This is like he's interested in your services and that's it, but that's not why he's here. No. And all of a sudden, like watching her have to like balance out like that customer service and also interacting with someone that's at a higher social stratification than she is at the moment is really interesting to watch, because then she gets even more licensed to find that fun part of herself, because there's someone who can be more balanced in the dynamic she's dealing with, because once she enters into a relationship with him, then that creates its own dynamic that's getting explored when she's not around Robin, which we don't get to see a whole lot of because Robin's always around. But in the subtext of the movie, there's a whole second relationship taking place there.
You know, I love that you said that part of herself, because that triggers sort of this this other concept that like I often deal with couples and families, but also individuals, is that dynamic of overfunction or underfunctioner kind of can go internal. And so, at core, we really specialize in systems work, like kind of generally. And so another approach that we might use is called internal family systems. Have you all heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And
absolutely.
so internal family systems in a nutshell is essentially this idea that internally we all have different parts of ourselves, right? There is a manager part, which is kind of the overfunctioner. If we're thinking externally, it would be the overfunctioner in the relationship. But the manager part, and then there's this, and all these parts are good parts that really help to protect us in different ways, right? The manager part gets you out of bed in the morning to go to work, right? But in an extreme form, it can be critical. It can be like, kind of controlling and things like that. Then we have this other part that, I might call the firefighter part, right? And that's kind of like the theory uses is like, it's the fun-loving dad part, right? It's the part that is spontaneous and, can relax. It's like the part of you that says, I want to go on vacation. I just need to escape, right? It's like the escape part. And so, externally we see it in those extreme forms with the two in this relationship. But, internally, Mrs. Doubtfire is, Robin Williams' manager part in a lot of ways, right? And so he had the part of him that is spontaneous and, and I think in an extreme form, that firefighter, escape part can be irresponsible. It can lead to a lot of things like, just instability and, like, he doesn't want to take feedback, right? We saw that, like, he was given feedback in the beginning and he quit the job because he didn't want to hear it, right? And it's just kind of the escape part. And so I think when you're saying that, like, she also has those parts, right? And so outside of that dynamic, they can each recognize sort of the parts that were missing in the dynamic that they had together.
Yeah, and I think we see that in divorces too, or breakups, like that we see couples see that part of their partner that got lost in the relationship come out again, and then the regrets start to hit really hard if they realize like, oh man, I thought this was just gone. I thought he or she changed. And unfortunately in movies we see the mom get painted in this picture where like, oh, mom has to be the manager to manage, fun, crazy, goofy dad. And we don't get the chance to see that fun side start to evolve out a little bit more, which is always there. And it's an unfair depiction of women to be like, oh, well, they just have to manage the whole family and they aren't still fun and can't still loosen up and lighten up and think about which party dress they want to wear or swimming in the pool and having fun.
And him trying to it's hitting a memory of watching the movie is in the guise of Miss Doubtfire, he does try to dampen that with her.
He does.
Like, he's like, you're going to look like I think he calls her maybe even a whore. Like, you're going to look like a whore.
Yeah, his jealousy got in the way of him being able to sort of encourage that for her.
It's like, Which I think in the movie, in my watching of it, I think it was more, it painted it more like, I don't want you to move on from me.
Yeah,
like,
he
I
was
wanna
jealous.
Stay back
Yeah,
together.
for sure.
And I also think, too, with Stu in particular, the Pierce Brosnan character, is he also knew her when she was younger. He knew her before she was married, before she was a mom. And so I wonder, too, in connecting with someone who knew you before all this, how freeing that might feel, or kind of give you the permission to like be that, to like tap back into, like you're talking about.
Yeah,
Dr.
that
Rios,
part
like
of her that was
part of
lost because of the dynamic in the couple's relationship.
Yeah, and you see that so often that if you see a couple post-divorce, or if you see an individual post where it's like, oh, I see my wife like having fun again and like going on dates, and we never went on dates anymore and we didn't do things, and you almost have to go like, well, I mean, what was the dynamic there that led to that getting extinguished and that becoming the dominant role that person had to play? And how do you depending on what point you have this client, how do we look at how we prevent that from happening in your next relationship, where we recognize what roles got assumed to a hyper degree so that it's over-functioning versus under-functioning, like you're also wonderfully illustrating today.
Yeah, that post-divorce like reorganization can be really challenging for people, where they're seeing one person moves on first, typically, the one that's been
Probably
ready
the
for
one- yeah,
years
yeah.
to move on, and I think it's really hard for the other partner to see like, oh yeah, there's the person that I married, the one that I think that looks fun. And
Right.
I think depending on how each person's dealing with it, they can have a lot of really strong reactions. Sometimes that comes out with the kids. Sometimes it comes out, especially with court involvement, it can be really hard for couples to move on and like kind of work towards, feeling good about sort of the outcome of everything. And there's a lot of resentment that gets held on to of like, you got the kids and you got this Pierce Brosnan. I mean, that sounds like a good deal. What do we do about this?
Yeah, right. Pierce Brosnan in 1993, pre-GoldenEye, James Bond level. So he's still a soap opera actor at this point in time? Yeah.
He's the youngest.
Deal.
He's age-wise. We always look up the ages of how old everybody is so he's actually the youngest person in the cast.
He does look like the youngest.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, which is like weird to think about now. If like the last movie I saw him in was Fire Saga, the Will Ferrell movie about
What?
the Eurovision.
Is that what that's called?
Fire Saga, The Legend of Fire Saga.
That
is
movie
the
was
band.
a fever dream I had. I couldn't tell you one thing about
But,
it.
like seeing him like the last time I saw him like gray with huge beard and huge mustache, like
He's
coming
in
down.
full swagger in this movie. Full
Yeah,
swagger.
he's got. You see why he was Bond? Like, oh yeah.
I wonder too, because I think when I was watching the movie, I was really hating, I'll just put it out there, I was really hating Robin Williams' character because of the way that he was behaving, like, throughout the movie. And now that we're kind of talking about it more and kind of putting it in the context of, since Sally Field was probably done with this relationship for years but couldn't get there. And he seems like he was really in denial but taken aback about the whole situation. So thinking of it like that, this isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. So much of the petty shit he does post-divorce makes more sense in context of like sabotaging the housekeeper and like calling her, like feeling okay with calling her at all hours of the day, pretending to be fake people to fuck up that situation for her. Like really doing a lot of what seemed like revengey behavior to get his needs met. And not really taking into consideration what he's doing.
Right. Or the impact on the family.
Yeah.
Right. And the kids.
Like he's choosing himself in that moment. I think he thinks he's not. And he is.
Right.
Because also one thing I was thinking, and we can talk about it more when we get to the kids section, is when the kids say like, I miss my dad. when he's right there and he's like, I'm right here. It's like what light bulb that came up for me is, yeah, you get to experience your kids and enjoy that feeling, and they aren't getting the advantage of experiencing their father. They're still missing their dad. So this is to me, in that moment, I was like, this feels like a purely selfish act to get what you want, which is seeing your kids, and your kids don't get to experience that. They're still missing their dad.
I agree with that. I also think, I mean, again, it's a movie, and he didn't get his rights, right? He only got to see them once a week, and that was the decision. And so I think, I think he had to he was probably very desperate at that point, and yes, and I think it's a little strange though. I did find that when the oldest kids found out that he was their dad, they had like a strong reaction at first, but then, they were like, okay, this is cool, I guess. But then they didn't even seem to act differently with him afterwards. Did anybody notice that?
It's very if the kids are really not front and center in this movie this arguably actively about them.
Let's talk about those kids.
Yeah. So I don't know. Is there anything else we want to talk about Miranda and Daniel's dynamics?
No, I think it's okay to move on from there. They have to talk about
perfect spot.
Yeah,
our props. Pretty much is what the kids were in this movie.
Yeah, the kids were. Yeah, exactly.
Support for Popcorn Psychology is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming champions of the world. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped just launched their 4th-generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the 4.0. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code POPCORN20 at manscaped.com. Imagine shaving with a sleek, well-designed, and optimized trimmer that makes shaving time your favorite time in the bathroom. I'm one of the first people to try the new 4.0, and I'm blown away by the performance. The craftsmanship and details on the 4.0 are next level. Look, we've all had a time where we've tried one of our regular beard trimmers on our junk. And when you shave your balls with that trimmer, it grabs and chews and can hurt you and leave you with a ball sack that looks like it just came straight out of your zipper, just like happened in There's Something About Mary. Please take a look at this trimmer to avoid having a zipper sack. Manscaped engineered the ultimate groin and body trimmer by focusing on intelligent functionality and an incredibly comfortable grooming experience. Their 4th-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. I now feel confident shaving my boys. This upgraded trimmer includes a multifunction on-off switch that can engage a travel lock. It also gives you the ability to turn on the 4000K LED spotlight on or off when needed for a more precise shave. The Lawnmower 4.0 even allows you to customize your trim through additional guard lengths with sizes 1 through 4. And did I mention wireless charging? The new wireless charging system uses electromagnetic induction, which can help your battery length last longer. Men, if you've been shaving with the same nut trimmer on your face, you've been doing it wrong. No person wants to end up with pubes in their mouth. It's time to get your own ball hair and body trimmer with Manscaped to make me time the best time and enhance your confidence with some nice, smooth boys. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code POPCORN20 at manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you. Once again, get 20% off and free shipping with the code POPCORN20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code POPCORN20. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped.
Exactly. The kids, now that we're like, I'm really assessing this movie, especially as a child therapist, the kids are just, what you're saying, like they're plot points. They're not like active participants in this narrative.
Right. They seem, I mean, they're like mini adults, right? They're sort of like, all the stuff that happens with kids when the parents are divorcing, especially the parents that are divorcing so badly as these two are, right? I think, they didn't show any of that stuff. Like, the kids were kind of well adjusted for a situation like this. Sometimes kids have school problems. Sometimes kids have, conduct problems, and they have trouble, with depression and things like that. And they do seem a little down, definitely, at some points, like when they're thinking about the situation. There's a scene in the beginning where they're watching the parents fight in that big blowout where she says she wants a divorce, and they're kind of on the stairs. And it's like, that's a pretty typical situation. I think parents are so consumed by what's happening that they don't necessarily notice when they're doing something really messed up in front of their kids. And I think they're not thinking about it.
Right. Or when the kids are stuck.
Yeah. And they do that several times in the movie, like actively, like when she picks up the kids early from his visitation, they fight in front of the kids, and it's pretty brutal. Like, yeah. And then also later, and he gets to have like the righteousness of being as Miss Doubtfire when she's shitting on him in front of the kids, be like, should you not talk about the father? And I'm like, shut the fuck up, dude. Like, and so like, yeah, they do, which I know is hard because you have to be mature, but I also think people can do it, of like being mindful of that your relationship with their father and your relationship with their mother is different than their relationship to you as parents. And
it's one of the hardest things for people to do. Yeah.
Especially when, I think in the situation Sally Field's in, where it seems like she's being blamed and like she's being more actively like disrespected by the kids, or what they're angry at her and taking out on her more, the divorce. And I can understand, and I definitely deal with families where this happens, where the parent so much wants to defend themselves, and it does take a lot of maturity and finding your self-care outside of your children to really not indulge in that. Because who doesn't want to defend themselves when they're being so like outrightly like misjudged, or when you're talking to someone they don't know the whole context? It does take a lot of wherewithal and maturity to just suck it up.
Yeah, one of the things that we do at CORE, sort of in the divorce mediation realm, but is not quite divorce mediation, is we do some reunification therapy with kids who have been estranged from one of their parents. Usually post-divorce, usually there's some dynamic just like this where one parent just doesn't have access to their kids, or the kids are refusing to see that parent. I don't know a case like this where there hasn't been sort of some really negative energy from the other parent about the parent. And oftentimes what's interesting is, sometimes it's really painful, and the parents don't operate at their best behavior, and they come into the therapy focusing more on their ex than they do the kids. And so it's I being in a situation like that, I get it. You've just been through the ringer in court, you've just gone through trying to defend yourself, and because it's sometimes court ordered reunification, sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. It's that lens and that film of this is about defending myself in court comes through, and then the kid has no interest in that, because that's not what the kids care about. That's a really adult thing that ends up coming out in those sessions sometimes. But it's painful. It's a painful experience, and I think really understanding how to move forward in a new dialogue that is very much focused on the kids is hard. And
well, and I feel like absolutely. And I feel like one of the things that we see in this movie that I think is a part of the movie magic of it is we really don't get a very accurate picture of what this would look like in real life with the kids. Like, I think that the reactions that they have, or that they only have a reaction for a scene, like that would not happen, and that's so far away from what real life would look like. Which feels bananas saying that. At first I was going to say, I think this is the most unrealistic part of the movie. And I was like, you have a dad who's dressing up like Mrs. Doubtfire. So to pretend, I was like, is this the most outrageous thing? But in a lot of ways, it kind of is, because I really feel like, again, the movie's supposed to be focused around this idea of everybody's here for the kids. And yet we don't see really what a any kind of natural reactions would be to this kind of situation, like in terms of kids thinking that they have to take a side, having the impact of that, even the conversation that they have the first time they come over to his house. And the oldest daughter is like, you got to do better than this, man.
That is probably one of the more realistic,
yeah,
kind of taking on the mom role, which happens of like, I take on the dual parent role and I'm like, you're not trying hard enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's like, how many scenes are there of who's the oldest daughter? It's
Lydia.
Yeah.
Lydia helping Natalie, after school, how was your day? Like all these like things that she does to like kind of, our parents are a little bit out there right now. Like we need to create some stability. So, I mean, she really doesn't get to be a teenager. She ends up becoming like another parent for the younger kids and kind of a role model. And, but she also has needs. And I mean, I think each developmental stage for kids, they're needing something different, especially after divorce. Yeah. Right. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Like when people are going through that process, they need that each kid's going to need something different. The older kid can't be a parent. She needs to be a teenager,
Well, and even the speech that he gives when he's leaving the house, and he says to the sons, "You're the man of the house." Like that's not helpful, but also very common. That is
for sure.
That is a realistic thing that happens for sure. But I do feel like one of the things, it's so interesting, the things that it felt like they kind of got right versus the things that were so bananas that they just like straight up don't make any sense. So giving that speech, right? I think it was also, I was saying to Brittany, important to have that moment where he is packing up and he's leaving, and he has it, and right in that moment says, this would have happened no matter what. This does not have anything to do with the party, with your birthday. Like this was going to happen no matter how we looked at it. And even having that acknowledgement, and also him saying goodbye and like packing up and leaving, like that, those are natural parts of a transition that actually are healthy for people to be a part of, because that helps just take in this moment, our lives are changing and this is how they're changing. And so I really liked that they did that, but then again, none of those things really get addressed at all in the rest of the movie. So it also felt like those roles that the kids take on were like only for that scene, versus I think that there would have been more arguing a lot of times, especially when a child is parentified. And I don't think it was quite that hard in this, I don't think she had to full on because a parent was being neglectful in some way or abusive, but more of taking on that role. I think she would have been arguing with mom. I think there would have been kind of like bashing heads because now I feel like I have to be the parent. And so like, I think we would have seen that. I think the whole reaction to both of them finding out in a pretty intense way, especially for the son, that Mrs. Doubtfire is actually their dad. I think that would have, I think that in that, again, without the movie magic, that would have had a way bigger, maybe even possibly relationship devastation.
The need for reunification therapy for sure.
Absolutely. Like just something that maybe would have changed their lives forever versus like, oh, guess what? Mrs. Doubtfire's really dad. Like,
but also
surprise.
He primed them for that, right? Like he was person that does that kind of thing.
And stuff.
So
sure.
they're like, oh yeah,
that's
this makes
true.
sense.
Yeah, that's true. That's a fair point as well.
Dad being bananas and ridiculous. But like I wanted to bring up something that occurred to me when you were talking, Hannah, is about Lydia and her parentification. Depending on how soon Mrs. Doubtfire entered the picture and started assuming that role of parental, taking over that parental unit, I wonder how much that would have been dampened by the presence of another adult assuming that role.
So this is what I thought about, which is her pushing back in that one scene.
The testing
would have happened every single day for 2 months.
But like we watched it
she would have
after school.
Depending on the kid.
Here's the thing. When someone else comes into your family system after you have had a major part of your family system move, you are now feel like you are now the protector of the system.
That's true.
And so I really feel like, especially with her being a teenager, in terms of what do teenagers want? They want to be trusted and they want to be taken seriously.
And treated like an adult.
So I really feel like, yes, I don't think your point is silly in any way. I think in movies, sure, that would definitely happen. In real life, I think that when we think of a system changing, it's like the bottom falls out of one role. Someone is going to take up that role and they're going to take it 1,000%. They're going to all the way to the wall.
And I also
looks like challenging another. It's the same idea of a step parent. It's the same idea of a step parent. You're coming in. I don't fucking know you. I don't know what's going to happen here. And you have more control and more impact with my parent than I do. Get the fuck out of here.
That's why I mean, like, I think it depends on the kid and the relationship they're able to form, like, with that caregiver, because I don't disagree. I think that obviously the challenging would have been more than one scene where, you know, that movie magic term has come up a lot where, like, it creates some distortion in the minds of parents and babysitters and substitute teachers and people like who walk into an established system thinking they're just going to fill a role and that they're going to get the same respect as the person who's been standing in the role. And that's not a thing unless you're used to a system like military or any paramilitary structure where there's an established
authority
order.
With a capital A.
Right.
Like whoever is authority.
Right, whoever is authority or work, you know, or granted this is your new boss and like people might test and pull some bullshit but like when the boss lays down the hammer, people go, okay, well my well-being, or not my well-being, but my finances and the rest of my life depends on me fulfilling this role. That doesn't happen in a house where someone is living their most authentic life, not playing a role of employee, soldier, police officer, firefighter, etc.
And I mean, I think just to simplify it as well as a teenager and a kid in general, you're used to your routine in your house. And I bet it seemed like their dad was probably the one who was with them after school, and probably they had a routine with their dad. And so I also could see her just being like, I don't want to lose this routine that we had with our dad. I also want to keep this routine for Natalie and Chris, and feeling more protective of that. And like even regardless of Mrs. Doubtfire is a new authority figure, you know, it's more like you are fucking up like what works.
Right. And they also had observed Dad sort of saying, I can take care of them. Right. And so it's also putting this in this position of like even trying to advocate for Dad, right? And there probably would have been more resistance in real life. I agree with you, Hannah, that I think there probably would have been more resistance. I also think it's really interesting, like, just thinking, thinking intergenerationally, systemically, I think about what does mom need, right? Not just a partner. Like, Miss Doubtfire was kind of like her mom.
She was
right?
like
she
confident.
There was something that she makes our lives so much better. It's not just because she has somebody to take care of the kids. She would look at her in this like, I need you, mom type way.
She doesn't really have friends she talks to, like peers.
Where are her friends? Where are her, like, also, like, at the very end, was that her mom that was there and like, say hi to Granny for me, he says.
Yes.
Like, at the beginning when he's leaving.
I mean, maybe her mom was not giving
her
her what she needed either, and she just kind of, maybe that led to her being sort of the way that she was. Like, I just think about intergenerationally, what is it that she's lacking in life that's making her sort of really put Mrs. Doubtfire, I mean, obviously the character, Mrs. Doubtfire, is like on a pedestal, right? But she felt more than just connected to, like, you're part of the family. Like, she didn't she didn't need to take Mrs. Doubtfire on the dinner date with the kids. Like, that's not something that, I mean, sometimes people bring, you know, au pairs that join the family, like, on family dinners, but this is like a date, like, that she's going on. I don't even know why she brought the kids on that. Like, it was just
it's very odd.
I can
All
see,
of it was
I have
odd.
heard people talk about bringing their kids on dates as kind of which I don't love, sort of like a testing ground for like their prospective partner. There's pros and cons.
I think
to
the
that
pool
idea.
thing would be
The pool-
perfect.
the pool
makes
thing,
a lot of sense. But going,
that's a
I
good
mean,
choice.
Romantic, fancy dinner.
For her birthday,
People
where
are
he's going to
having
give her
business
jewelry, like,
right.
Yeah, and inviting the nanny is, I mean, I think we're trying to do mental gymnastics around the number one priority of this movie, which is the farce of Mrs. Doubtfire.
Right.
And to make it all come crashing down in spectacular fashion.
No doubt. Because this is like a slight tangent, and I'll go do it quickly, is because when I was watching this movie with Hannah, I was like, the best approach for him, Daniel, to look the best in the situation is to not go to the dinner as Mrs. Doubtfire, just make up an excuse, be there fully as Daniel, and then be like, oh my God, you bumped into me. Like, I'm at an important business dinner, and looking very responsible.
Absolutely.
And like, showing her what she's missing kind of energy, and instead he just fucks it up royally. Right. But I think that's the part of him that's still not quite sure how to get his emotional needs met, and so that he's just reacting and not thinking things all the way through.
Right. Agreed, 100%. I also think, with people getting divorced in the mediation process and in the divorce process, there has to be a little bit more intentionality than they had in terms of what does it mean to introduce a new partner. Like, usually couples that are getting divorced or separating will have to kind of come to an agreement about, okay, you don't introduce the kids to your partner until you are at this point in your relationship. Yeah. And then when you do, like, I think in good divorces or good separations, it's always ideal for, the father or the mother, whoever it is, to like, to meet this person and just like know who they are, because they're going to be now hanging out with your kids a lot. And so I think that in today's divorce world, there might be a little bit more intentionality around that whole introduction of the new partner.
And I've had friends who their divorce agreements have been, they don't meet the person until we're like engaged, or they don't meet our partner until we've been dating for at least a year. Like, there's like these really concrete milestones that the divorced couple agrees upon for like the next partner. But yeah, just kind of going back to what we were saying with the kids, I think what also is kind of is very two-dimensional in this movie, like we've been saying, is sort of how they continue to play their parts in this farce when they find out, the two older kids, when they find out that their dad is Miss Doubtfire. I think there'd be a lot more genuine, they'd fuck it up, I guess is what I mean, in the sense that either they would accidentally call him dad, or they would start laughing. I feel like I would just laugh hysterically. Like, I would just be like, oh my, I can't believe we're doing this, dude. Like, I feel like as soon as I would know, I would be acting like a spaz, because I'd be like, what is happening?
Like, Mom, you know that this is Dad, right? Like that's not something that specific, but even just like the silliness of like watching your parent dressed up as a
they didn't seem to act different at all.
No, they didn't.
Like, they would either be totally freaked out and awkward around Dad as Mrs. Doubtfire moving forward, or they'd be, super, even more affectionate and like odd.
Yeah, like
it would.
just,
I think
they would act unnatural,
and
because
also
it's an unnatural situation.
Right? Yeah, they would. And also, I think something else just clicked in my head too. That when I was watching it too, like, when he failed the challenge of where are you from, your accent seems a bit muddled from the boyfriend. Like, there is a 0% chance the boyfriend would let that go. 0% chance. He'd be like, something's off here. If you hear someone's accents are a huge thing in England. Like, people,
they are.
like, if you think back to My Fair Lady and the things where people like kind of look back, like, we can analyze the accent that comes from a particular street.
Yeah.
Like, people who are linguists, but it's an important part of identity. Even in Chicago, there's a north side accent and a south side accent, and if you are around enough people from various parts of the city, you can start to hear it, and you know where someone is from, and it's like only like amplified with England, where people's accent is very, very specific to where they are from, and her failing that challenge, like, I just, like, that whole system would have blown up, and I am very curious to, like, wonder, like, in reality, how fast that would have blown up, plus the kids overhearing him kind of make that question at some point, and then that all just blowing up. It's Dad! Ha! His accents are so good, but apparently not that good. Or the kids would be talking about it, and Mom would overhear it later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This would have blown up spectacularly.
And also, too, with like the unnaturalness of it, that's us going off of the total idea that the kids would be relaxed. I think that this is causing, which we've kind of referenced in the beginning, of like the secret keeping, of like he's asking his kids to keep a huge secret from their mom, who they already have the two older kids, or at least the oldest daughter, a tenuous relationship with right now because of the divorce. And so it is breaking down that dynamic, you know, inherently. And I think I would be stressed out. Like, my personality is like the oldest daughter would be stressed. Like, when is this going to blow up? When is Mom going to find out? Oh my God, he did that thing right there. Can she tell that he's not really English? Like the Stewart thing, I would have stayed up all night thinking about that. Oh God, Stu realized that the accent isn't natural. Like, he's not thinking about the undue stress he's causing his children by keeping this secret. And the movie also is not demonstrating that either. Like there's no consequences with his relationship with his kids, which is bullshit.
Right. We call that a MacGuffin.
Yeah, like it is total, like it is unfair, like how this movie like kind of like wipes its hands of like the impact this would have on his relationship with his kids. Not just his relationship with them, but also their relationship with their mom, and maybe even the relationship with each other. Like it could be also a thing where Chris and it's not uncommon for the two older siblings, especially if they're opposite gender, especially because they seem much closer in age than their younger sibling, to maybe get on different sides of this argument of like one taking on the more of the like quote unquote mom role, one more of the quote unquote dad role, or mom's side, dad's side, and that causing conflict between them. So he's doing something, I don't know, you could argue I'm conflating it a little bit, but Daniel's doing something that is having a ripple effect on all the relationships around him and having no awareness of it. And this movie is also not demonstrating that.
Yeah,
I agree.
So let's take a quick 5-second break here. And the last thing I think that I wanted to point out as far as like kids before we switch topics on this one is that I thought watching this as an adult and seeing how quickly the parents went from argument to divorce with a secret bomb that everything has been wrong for a long time. Remember, this movie was marketed for kids. And I think this movie did not do a great job of establishing for kids that if mom and dad get in a fight, the marriage isn't just going to suddenly end and dad's going to move out.
Yeah, like I think, that's a great point too, because the kind of what we're talking about, that's a great point. Like this was marketed for kids. I definitely saw it when it came out as a kid.
Yeah, in 93,
it was a kids movie because it's Robin
8.
Williams. But the kids were like not centered in this story. It's bananas how uncentered they are in this story, given like you're saying the marketing of this movie.
Even how little they're on screen, period.
Yeah.
Like they are not, absolutely.
It was just about the silliness, I think.
Yeah.
Just makes it sort of for kids. But then, I think a lot of movies in the 90s and earlier that were supposed to be for kids, like I think about other Disney movies and things like that, you know, they're all being remade for a reason. There's, there's like, you know, I think of like, you know, even the movie Pete's Dragon, right? Like, I don't know if you remember the one that's like a musical,
vaguely.
But like,
oh yeah,
they had to remake that, and it's a really like nice remake. It's totally different. It's not even remotely like. I mean, the musical was nice, but you know, things like that, you know, need to be remade. And I wonder what a Mrs. Doubtfire today, so many years later. How many years later is it?
That was 93.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
That's
so it's almost, 30.
Almost 30 years later.
Almost 30.
I wonder what like a movie like Mrs. Doubtfire might be today.
I feel like the kids would be acting out. There'd be a lot more emotionality on the kids' perspective. And I think you had mentioned this, Dr. Rios, before we started recording. It also conveys because there's natural resiliency with kids. I work with kids almost primarily. There can be, and I've talked about this in other episodes, there can be just natural resiliency, which makes kids seem like the kids in this movie, where they can just bounce. They can just bounce back and snap back in and be fine. And I think we do a disservice to children by assuming that is the baseline. That is like the set narrative, and that kids that are deviating from that are not, there's something wrong with them.
Well, one of the amazing things about divorce is that kids are then court ordered to therapy. and sometimes the parents are, but oftentimes it's really the
More
kids.
the kids,
yeah. And the kids end up having this narrative that like, I need to figure out and I need to fix this, even though I know it's intended to be okay. The kids need the therapy because they need to cope with the divorce, but really it needs to be a little bit more intentional than that. Just, oh, wait, you have to go to therapy. Like, we're getting divorced. We're making all these mistakes, but really you're the one that needs to focus on how to fix things. And, because it ends up being the behavior issues that come out in the process. And so they end up becoming the identified clients when really it's not. And, parents will sometimes be in therapy, but,
And as the receiving end professional, usually in that situation, what sucks is that it also then you're treating the kid perceives it as I'm being punished for my parents' behavior. And then therapy is then viewed as a punishment, which can really poison therapy for kids. Hopefully not forever, but it can definitely put a stank on therapy for years.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then parents don't understand that. They have very much the energy of like, you as the therapist should be able to knock that down and like bibbity bobbity boo this kid into compliance and engagement with therapy. And it's like, this kid didn't make the choice to come here. This kid's being it's like violin lessons, but where you have to talk about your deepest, darkest feelings. And they're like, fuck everybody. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, parents. And so, of course, they're going to be guarded or whatever, however that looks.
Just going through all these trust issues from the whole separation and divorce process, and then what is therapy is a relationship based on trust. And so and sometimes it works out great, but sometimes it's also like, okay, so I've gone through all this, and why am I supposed to trust another adult that says that they care?
Exactly.
I think it's hard.
Especially after this, my dad dressed up as a woman. After my dad has acted deceitfully, told us to keep secrets,
and I'm the one sitting in a room having to talk to a grown up that you think that I just am gonna be happy to be talking to a grown up about this? Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah,
I think they could have done a really good job making a scene at least at like some support for the kids, having some child therapist talk to them, even if it was just one session, because that's usually how they do it in the movies.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, at least when they do it, a child and an adult therapist, and we don't deal with the trope that we deal with in every other therapist movie, where the therapist then starts dating someone from the family.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I just rewatched First Wives Club, and like the fact that marriage and family therapist ends up engaged to one of the husbands is so crazy. Anywho, but yeah, so I think is there anything else about the kids we want to touch upon?
No,
Nope.
I think that we covered it.
So we can go to the third topic, which I'm going to throw to you, Ben, which is resourcing.
Sure. So the reason I wanted to talk about resourcing is because for those of you that have been listening to me know by now that I tie everything into trauma, and my personal belief is that with every client, it's always trauma. If people don't come into therapy because they are sad, they don't come in because they are anxious, they don't come in because they're worried, they come in because something happened, or they lost something because they were sad or worried, or something happened that made them that way. And when we see this, the way we get shown the divorce happens is all we can read from it is that things have been wrong with their marriage for a long time, but what is said directly in the dialogue was that, well, they didn't go to see anybody. They haven't really talked about it. Things have been wrong for a long time and not working, but it's been like a unspoken thing. So the traumatic moment of I want to get a divorce, plus all that happens of Daniel losing his connection with his kids throughout the whole of it, his whole life has been based around these kids. He says it over and over. That's the crux of his character, is that he has been the absolute caregiver for these children their whole life, and that is immediately severed from him brutally and quickly, and that's traumatic. There's no two ways about it. Like, is it PTSD?
Yes.
No,
but you could argue that Miss Doubtfire is a trauma response.
I absolutely would argue that Mrs. Doubtfire is a trauma response.
That's making me laugh. Sorry. What a crazy thing to say out loud.
It wouldn't be the first time we've seen someone put on a mask and do something crazy in response to a trauma. What is it? Now, would it?
Oh, Benjamin, say what you want to say.
Just say what you want to say.
When you think about trauma too,
Like dressing like a bat?
there's the A lot of my clients I work with that do have trauma, we'll kind of talk about the big T trauma versus little T trauma, right?
Yes.
It's all trauma. It's all in the umbrella of trauma.
Yeah.
There isn't, and I think sometimes when we don't think about the trauma, I mean, divorce is a trauma.
Yes.
Right? It's a significant loss.
To everybody.
Significant restructuring. And so, there is a trauma response that happens. And, I think oftentimes people will just say, oh, well, that parent's acting crazy, and it's, well, I don't know how you would react if like something was just ripped from under you, and, that you no longer had control. I mean, trauma is so much about control, like a control response and like being able to know what's going to happen. And so, I agree with you that like there is always going to be that there. And when we don't talk about that piece, we're really missing out on like a big opportunity for compassion and understanding with how people react.
Right. And what I think, I don't know if I've said it on here, but I say it to clients all day, every day, is that when people think about trauma, they think about the big T event, trauma that happens, death, dismemberment, sexual violence, these kinds of things. But what people don't realize is that trauma, including big and small T, happens even when nothing violent happens. And recognizing that what trauma is really is when something causes you to think differently about yourself and differently about the world. Mm-hmm. And that's the moment when a trauma occurs, when something changes the way you think and feel about yourself and about the world. That's when something's taken from you. You can break your leg on a bicycle accident, get healed, and hop back on the bike and have no trauma response to it, even though you got a very significant injury. You can also get one. We're going to...
Just pause.
I can just edit it out.
Just turn it to off. Just turn it to off. It's because it's temperature controlled.
It's fine.
Anyway.
It's fine. I just edited it out. I just go in and go, delete.
Scene.
Right. And 3, 2... Now, everyone, we're just going to get it out now.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm good.
You're good?
I'm fine.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yep.
Do I need to do something ridiculous?
Nope. I'm good. Just go.
All right. You're going to bust out laughing.
No, I'm gonna keep it together. I'm looking out the window. It's nice outside.
1. Bananas.
No, she's good.
Okay. All right. So, we'll go back to point in 3, 2, 1. So when that moment when something is taken away from someone, when they change the way they feel about themselves, their position in the world, their understanding of the world, that's what we see happen to Daniel. His whole role has been primarily caregiver. Yes, he does work, but we know he's been in and out of jobs, and that his position in the family is to be the point person for these kids. And when that's taken away from him so brutally, to see him enter in a ridiculous behavior pattern that's threat-based and is all about extinguishing the threat of not being able to be in that role, it makes a lot of sense to me that we would see him lean into the skill set that he already knows he has, which is becoming someone else professionally in order to solve that problem. And that's what resourcing is. That's what we do. And though we see it in a ridiculous manner in this movie, that one of the ways that people deal with mitigating trauma response and healing from it is to recognize and lean into the skills and talents that you are already good at, you already feel competent about, and start using those in creative ways to solve the challenges presented by the traumatic situation. And the more people are able to do that spontaneously, the more healthy they become, because they realize that they aren't trapped in the situation forever. They're not stuck reliving the moment over and over, that they do have skills that they can use to solve the problem. They don't have to reinvent a whole new identity, even though a new reality is forced upon them.
Yeah.
But they don't have to reinvent themselves totally. They can just repurpose skills that they already have. I use a contractor metaphor with people a lot, of learning to recognize that people that are contractors walk into jobs with years of knowledge and a toolbox, and they don't walk into a job worried about, how am I going to solve this? What am I going to do with this problem? They walk in and go, okay, what's the problem? They walk in, they assess the situation, knowing that they have the knowledge and the tools from which to do it, and that most problems that they encounter can be solved with a hammer, a saw, a screwdriver, some putty.
Wood glue,
right? that the same range of tools can be used to solve the same range of problems because the same range of problems are constructed with the same materials. And like learning to incorporate that my skills that I've developed throughout my life can be applied to a multitude of situations in creative ways helps to people to realize, okay, I'm not broken. I'm not stuck. This isn't over, that I can adapt to this situation, and that much like the contractor, they go, okay, even if I don't have the right tool, I don't need to stay trapped in the worry that I don't have the tool or the knowledge. I'll just go get the tool and ask somebody, how do you do this? And then I'll go do it and figure it out.
Yeah, and he was so resourceful, right?
Right.
It really, I mean, I can't highlight enough how much of a strengths-based approach that was for Robin Williams' character.
Yep.
He was just, you know, he really just utilized his resilience. And so creative, right? He was so creative. I was really impressed with that piece of it. And I think even though it wasn't obviously an extreme example, it really just highlights that resilience piece. And I mean, if we're talking about trauma, we're thinking fight or flight, right?
Right.
And I mean, that was his fight, you know?
Yep.
I mean, he went a little bit into the flight mode at the end once the court made their final decision and, you know, all of that. But it's definitely...
And I think it was also kind of in conjunction with that, an inflation of an already defense mechanism he already utilizes, which is humor. Like when he has to meet with that social worker, I assume, the first time, the court appointed whatever, he just goes into that impressions mode when he's looking for the job thing, and like that impressions mode. And so like that's also, I think, and Sally Field also references that too, like we can't have a serious discussion. Like he uses humor and like impressions, and unfortunately it's gotten in the way of a lot of things. And like you guys were saying, if you look at it from a strength-based model, that can be flipped to be more helpful and not a barrier.
Well, and I feel like a really good example of what you guys are talking about, we see when he is at the unemployment office, or no, when he's meeting with the court liaison, and he is trying to use humor to like create a relationship with this person, and it's not working.
Yeah.
And it's coming.
I mean, people
across.
use humor to deflect.
Exactly.
Also.
Exactly. Yeah. And that it makes it seem like he's not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Which that's not what it is. He's trying to use humor to deflect, but also he is trying to use the skills that he has to kind of, for the place that he's in, right? Like he's meeting with somebody who's going to have control over whether or not he can see his fucking kids without supervision.
Yeah. And I think also like, yeah, I think it is like his go-to mode because it is a strength of his to be funny and to do impressions is his job when he has a job. And I think like a lot of stuff, it can also, like I said, get in the way of like it's like when it's clear that she's not into it, the court-appointed person, he really struggles. He can't adapt very well to that.
Yeah.
And then when he's talking with his wife, like that big fight in the beginning, he keeps trying to make jokes and she's like, this is not a joking moment. I cannot joke with you. And so I think he grows in the movie, I can't believe I'm saying this, but where he grows in the movie is he does learn to be adaptable. I think I'm interested in what
Look
you
how
think
adaptable you're being right now.
I know, because I really couldn't stand him starting to talk about this. But and also with what you're saying, Ben, too, is and I'm interested in your thought about this, is he is like a creative, like with a capital C. And I think what helped him adapt, which adaptation requires vulnerability, is I think he had to role play to get there. Like he almost had to put on an act to change, which obviously we don't do that level of it in therapy. Like we don't have people go out and pretend to be other people, but like we do. Sometimes we do that with like when you do like you're talking about integrated family systems, like IFS when it's done in therapy, from what I understand, because I don't do it myself, but is like you do kind of role play as different parts of you.
Definitely.
And that kind of thing. And so he is doing something that could be used as a therapeutic technique, not in that way, and obviously not to the detriment of like his children.
Right.
I would not be like, don't go out in the wild like this, bro, like with your kids, but like you might do a version of that in a controlled setting.
Yeah, on CORE's Instagram page, we actually all of our staff do these sort of like internal dialogues with different parts, kind of thing, and I think it's really helpful to practice that. as a skill, just as a human being. You know, if you're working on something and you're trying to sort of understand those parts of yourself, having sort of those internal dialogues can be so useful. And it can feel like acting a little bit, but it's all you, right? It's all different parts of you. Nobody gives you that script, right? You just sort of work with it, work with what you have, what resources you have. And it can be really, really powerful to understand those parts.
And it can, and exactly what you're saying. It can help people realize that is a part of them. Like, because we're in Chicago, so there's Second City. Like, when I've worked with teenagers, we would recommend a lot for kids with like social anxiety and also some kids on the spectrum to do like Second City improv groups for, I think, kind of the same thing we're hitting upon, which is putting yourself in like a different setting, a more creative setting, can help you realize like, oh, these things are inside of me, and you eventually get to a point where you don't need the construct of role play or improv or something to access those parts of you. It's almost like you have to trick yourself into realizing things about yourself and then own it.
Right. The importance of spontaneity in recovery is impossible to understate. Like helping people find the ability to access their ability to float in and out of roles as opposed to locking into what they feel they have to do to survive helps them do things that feel like getting back in touch with themselves. And through that, you find strength in recovery is that you realize that you do have the ability to solve problems, that you aren't just going to shut down, that you're not going to retreat into a version of yourself that is either inappropriately fighting or flighting away from the situation or fawning to just agree to whatever it is, even if you don't agree with it. We see recovery in the re-engagement with the parts of you that feel comfortable accessing the skills you've already developed and applying them in new ways, and especially for capital C creatives, figuring out how you get them to re-engage with that and feel like themselves is so important, that they feel like, oh, I have license to do these things again that feel like me, and that my art doesn't just have to become a tool for me to process trauma and become representative of all that I've gone through. It can be whatever I want it to be, whatever I feel in the moment. And we see that with Robin in the development of Mrs. Doubtfire as a character. He spontaneously realizes that, I mean, I know he's drunk and in crisis and like flying through this insane situation, but the moment we start to see of recovery for him is actually at that dinner when he sits down from his boss and didn't realize that he's still Mrs. Doubtfire. And then he just goes, fuck it, we're all in now. And he like goes like, I'm introducing you to your new children's show character.
Really, really spontaneous. I loved it.
I did too.
He just kind of like went with it.
Yep. He went like, all right, we're in this now, because he was forced into a situation, which I love to see when that happens in therapy, or therapies that can help produce that, which is that getting people into a state where you are in the situation now, the spotlight is on, and go.
He could have easily gone down the road of embarrassment. He could have easily gone into this, self-defeating, like, oh, right. I've been found out.
Right, I'll see myself
type mode.
out.
Yeah, exactly. But he didn't. He just took that moment and he ran with it.
And then that launched his career, including the, speech at the end where he's providing this very heartfelt speech about how to, encourage parents that even if you guys don't love each other anymore, that it's okay. They, your parents still love you. That the kids still love, or that your parent still loves the child. I'm just going to delete that and go back to. We see him talking about recognizing the need for parents and children to always know that the love between a parent and a child stays pure, even if the love between parent and parent no longer exists.
Absolutely.
And I would say that it's more my final thoughts, but I think also that is movie him getting there. It's such a mature place he gets to by the end of growth, in the sense of that messaging he gives out, which I think is important for kids to hear. I do think that is a good thing for kids who've watched this movie, whose maybe parents were getting divorced or had gotten divorced. It was a good message of families can look like anything. A good family isn't necessarily a family that's together. Sometimes parents are better off not together. I think that was a very strong message, especially for the early 90s.
I mean,
for kids to
that
hear.
Speech at the end that Mrs. Doubtfire gives. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I just spaced out for a minute.
No, it's okay.
Apologies. Yeah.
But I was also going to say, but also I don't know, the movie magic part of it is I don't know if he would have gotten there that quickly himself. I feel like that's someone who's done more growth than he has gone over the course of the movie.
I think that's very possible. Like, we don't quite know what time frame that
That's
all
true.
started to happen in, like how quick they built that whole set. I mean, and got a show production together and characters defined and et cetera. The time frame got a little loose there, but yeah, that it seemed a bit fast for him to get there. But also, when people access these roles, like, it almost gets into the Jungian psychotherapy kind of models where you recognize that people all have these predefined archetypal roles of characters that exist in their head, which is at least partially what IFS is based on too, is like recognizing that you have these archetypal characters in your head that provide different voices that represent different parts of your internal system.
In your head and in your body.
Right.
Which is because so much of IFS is body work too, right? Of like, where are you storing things and where are you storing trauma, for example, in your body? Where are you feeling most protective in those moments? When one of those parts comes out, where, like, sometimes I'll ask my clients, like, where is that sitting with you right now? Where in your body is it being stored? And like, can you hold that part of you? Can you attach to them? Can you work through that together? So
right. So part of the contention I would have with you, Brittany, is like, I think him as Daniel would probably not have gotten there that soon.
Yeah.
But him as Mrs. Doubtfire,
Because he's playing a role.
Well, he's also, in playing the role, he's accessing the wise old woman archetype.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where he's going to have access to this almost genetic level societal information that gets passed down, which is what Jung's theories were about, is that recognizing that since characters exist across cultures, regardless of language barriers, regardless of geographic barriers, that the same characters exist in stories throughout all of the world, that therefore means that is an example of the universal human condition and human experiences that must get passed down through the genetic code.
And also, to wildly undercut what you just said, which is very valid, is I think sometimes when we're putting on a little hat, we can just be a better person than we're not wearing that hat. Like, I say a lot of shit as a therapist that I know is true and right and good. And then my personal life, I don't always follow the things that I say. So I think also...
therapists are human, right?
Yeah. Right.
We all have those parts of ourselves too,
Yeah.
And I think we have to be accepting and compassionate to all of those pieces of ourselves.
Yeah. But I guess
how
it makes
much-
it more realistic that he says that as Miss Doubtfire and then maybe isn't quite there personally.
Yeah, exactly. Because even just thinking about what's interesting about the way that we're talking about this right now is that thinking for him in that moment, being like, well, how would Mrs. Doubtfire talk about divorce?
Yeah. What would Jesus
But
do?
that by doing that, he is...
Like, what would Miss Doubtfire do?
Yeah. But that when he is utilizing that and thinking about that, that's when he's resourcing the parts of himself that he knows this is, this isn't coming from nowhere. This isn't coming from a script. I mean, like, technically it probably is, but who cares? That's not what we're talking about right now. But that, pause, maybe.
Breaking news. This important PSA is brought to you by Manscaped.com. This is your pubic service announcement and the news you've all been waiting for. The Manscaped engineering team has confirmed that they have successfully created the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is now available for purchase in the USA and Canada. This new trimmer was just released only moments ago, and we are one of the first to get our hands on it and share the news. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free shipping with the code POPCORN20 at manscaped.com. I'm one of the first people to try the new 4.0, and I am blown away by the performance. The craftsmanship and details on the 4.0 are next level. Their advanced ceramic blade and skin-safe technology is so good that it almost seems as if Manscaped worked with Elon Musk's engineers to ensure your testes are as safe as possible. Look, we've all had the time where we have chewed up our sack using the wrong trimmer and made our balls look like they came straight out of the scene from There's Something About Mary, where Ben Stiller zipped his sack right in the zipper. We have all had that awkward moment where we explained to our date after we trimmed our nuggets and tenders that you know what? I had an accident. I had an accident when trimming, and that is why there are weird shaped scabs all over. We don't want to have that conversation anymore, and you don't have to. The new Manscaped trimmers are so much better and so much different than other ones. So what makes these trimmers different from all the other trimmers? A new multi-function on or off switch, which can engage a travel lock, created for people who like to travel. The Lawnmower 4.0 gives you the ability to turn on the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. The new trimmer even allows you to customize your trim all over through additional guard lengths with sizes 1 through 4. And looks-wise, it's sleek with a two-tone matte and gloss finish that even features a hot foil stamped black chrome Manscaped logo. Show that mower off loud and proud. The optimized Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer is waterproof, so you can groom in the shower and not have to worry about making a mess on the bathroom floor. And did I mention wireless charging? The Lawnmower 4.0's new wireless charging system uses electromagnetic induction, which can help battery length last longer. If you're still trimming your face with your ball trimmer, it's time to make some changes. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code popcorn20 at manscaped.com. No person wants to end up with pubes in their mouth, and your balls will thank you. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code popcorn20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off free shipping at manscaped.com and use code popcorn20. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped.
Psychodrama, she's gone like all over the country to do like trainings and things like that. And the way she talks about it is really just, you know, there can be so much family healing just by like going and being with a group of people who are now representing these different family members for you, and you're working through a scene.
Yep.
But it's like the story of your life, and
right.
So it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I love it. I may go back to it one day and dive back into it. But what I love about the modality is the way that it forces you into that spontaneous role where you have then, because you have to portray the role, you then connect to the viewpoint of the other person spontaneously, and the blocked parts of you that were blocked by being in the activated state of either being hyper alert because of anxiety and anger or responding to trauma, which is all really the same thing, but that's a discussion for a different podcast.
Indeed.
Is recognizing that those parts of you that keep that walled off and blocked from perspective now get spontaneously bypassed, much in the way that we do when you have a motivational interviewing discussion with a client where you work around a problem rather than continually try to beat through it. But beating through viewpoints is frequently what happens when relationships are having trouble, is people just try to hammer their viewpoint into their spouse or partner and expect compliance to that their point is just so rock solid and clear, and my emotion so sincere that you must agree with me and you must see, and they don't. And they can't for various reasons, but recognizing that enforcing someone into a spontaneous acting situation where they then have to act as that person, they have to access that information and translate it to action and speech in a scene where they are then forced to consider that person's viewpoint in a way that never clicked for them before, and that causes immense moments of realization, empathy, and healing that I would love to see. The caution I have with it, with Daniel, is that Daniel is an actor, and he is already doing this. So
He
I
might
would
remove his vulnerable part from it.
correct that he might tap into a professional skill, and then because he is leaning into something that he's supposed to be better at everybody at because he is a professional and this is his profession, he puts on a different hat, and instead of him being the vulnerable part of him connecting to that, he becomes a character. Where it gets dicey is that's still all really the same thing, that he's still accessing the same things. Whether or not he can do it in a way that separates him out from being himself versus being a professional.
Right. Like he's acting all the time. He's in all of these different parts, and now he's going to do it in therapy. You know, I could see where there might be some hesitation there. But it also, you know, what I like about psychodrama, what I like about systems work, I'm thinking of Brittany, like with play therapy. Like there's something about a therapy here for all of the family, but definitely for Daniel, that I think there needs to be movement. right? So like there's something about when a family is stuck in something and they need to change, like in family systems work, we move around the room. We make people change seats. There's something that's active and moving about doing that work. And I think that really that if I were a therapist and talking to this family and, you know, a mediator for Miranda and Daniel, I would really recommend some sort of movement therapy, something where it's, yes, talking is important, but I think, you know, something where you're really repositioning yourself and really understanding somebody else's perspective in an active way. It
makes me think about sculpting.
Exactly. Family sculpting.
And I know that I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it's actually what I was thinking about in terms of treatment. So I can talk about it, but I want to make sure that you are done.
Oh, yes. So
Ben, so I don't
almost there.
I don't want to jump in. Yeah. You finish and then I'll talk about that. But I feel like that's exactly where my brain went to.
So
Go ahead.
the last thing that I wanted to cover on the psychodrama aspect and what I think would actually be it's usually like one of the most painful but also eye-opening things is when the director comes in and switches and makes the kids play the parents.
That's what you do in sculpting.
Yeah, I mean, I know sculpting can do a lot of things.
So much overlap between theories.
Is.
It's unbelievable.
Right.
It is.
It's all the
Anyway,
same ideas that I see in healing. But like forcing, I think of Robin Williams live on Broadway talking about like monks lighting themselves on fire when I think of this because he just goes like, deal with your shit. And like I feel like that's what happens when you do that is like you force a parent out of that role to see how are you being perceived in the eyes of a pure child that can't be argued with, contended with, and you don't realize what they're picking up. So you watch them play your dynamic and your dynamic with them and talk about something that's going to bust through whatever walls you put up. It's going to hit hard, it's going to hit fast, and it's going to last forever. That impact of that. They are never going to forget that. I can't guarantee change, but that perspective shift is going to be immediate on seeing children play that out. And that's the value of psychodrama is it can give the freedom to bust out of the typical family system roles and have a director flip stuff on its head and have so many perspective shifts happen in ways that will maybe happen with a skilled talk therapist, but might take quite a while. And like the actual like getting the movement and changing things is phenomenal. So that would be my recommendation for this family is like, how do we get out of these repetitive roles where mom and dad are likely to pick up fights and be dealing with their stuff and the kids be stuck again on the stairwell, but just in a therapist's office this time. End of speech.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like, so you guys know that when I do treatment, I just like wing it when we get to it. So, but as you were talking and then hearing you, Dr. Rios, I feel like thinking about, so sculpting is, and again, something that I know I've talked about on the podcast before because I've had some really, as an intern actually had a really amazing experience with it, with a family that was a blended family that had, I think, 5 children, and one of the like 10-year-old did the sculpting. And it was so interesting to watch where they put like, and one parent is completely out of the picture. Like, oh, like she's out of the room and like doing something. And this is where everybody else is, and watching. And part of sculpting is actually physically putting the parent in that place in the room and telling them how to stand. This is what I think your body would look like. And all of the things that you can watch a parent watch a child and be like, oh, holy shit, this is what this looks like to you.
It's really eye-opening. It's really like...
Yeah. It really can make... And again, I think the other thing that I really like about doing family sculpting is something that we're talking about in this movie that we haven't seen is the viewpoint from the kids, right? This really gives the kids some power. It gives them a little bit of a chance to really show what they're experiencing in a way that feels comfortable because they play. Right? They play and they make, and again, this is an old reference, but like playing dolls or playing anything where you have to set up a family experience.
Yeah.
They already are envisioning these things and have this creative part of them. Again, Ben, like you were referencing about Daniel, in a similar way. So you put kids in this position where they can say, this is what it looks like for me. And having the parents, and not only the parents, but part of what I also saw in this example when I was an intern was the kids feeling more connected. And sometimes, so what actually happened is one of the older siblings started to help. And be like, oh, you know what though? What if we did it like this? And the 10-year-old being like, yes, that makes sense. And seeing the kids, the collaboration that the kids now have of showing this picture to the family and how important it is, and giving that little bit of, again, opening that window to the roles, but also opening the idea that there isn't only one person's point of view here that is the most correct or the most accurate.
Right. When people tell stories, like in narrative work,
yes,
the narrative from each family member is essential, because you can't exist in a bubble. Right. That's why, for me, I'm obviously individual therapy is something I do too. It's not just families and couples work.
Yeah.
But even from that individual stance, I really have to kind of imagine that every one of those people that this client is talking about in their family are there. And how would I respond if they were all there? So not make it just sort of like this is with blinders on.
Yeah.
You have to sort of do the work of understanding each perspective. And if so-and-so were here right now, is a sort of like a primer that I'll give. If your mom was here, how would you describe it to her? Yeah. How would you describe it with her here versus if she wasn't here? And why would there be a difference? Right? What are you trying to protect?
Question.
And so, having the kids in this family in Mrs. Doubtfire, each of them is going to have a different perspective. They all sort of seem very joined, but I would imagine they each have different perspectives. Yeah. And so making sure that it's not just the kids lumped together.
Exactly.
It's each of them has a very unique perspective and see things that the others might not see because of their developmental differences.
Yeah, so there's such a big age difference between the two teenage kids and the little. Like, she's like 5. So that's her life, her experience of this situation is wildly different than her teenage siblings.
And she, I think Natalie probably, if she did a sculpt, right, first of all, I think kids that age don't really understand lying yet.
Yep.
They do, but they're almost like maybe 6, 7 is when it really starts. So
absolutely,
there would be so much honesty and exaggeration there to really help the family to see what was going on. And I've done therapy post-divorce with kids and one parent, kids and the other parent, but when the ideal situation is with both parents being involved in the therapy, as opposed to it just being they're not together anymore. And a lot of parents will say, well, I'm divorced, I don't want to deal with the family stuff. But if you have a child, you're basically connected to this person forever. No, you don't have to deal with them the same way as when you were married. And I would encourage them to sort of keep that separate. You can't treat this person as if you're still married. The fights will feel very similar if they do that. But really getting into a place where, this is your co-parent, switching from marriage, this is my partner or spouse, or, to this is my co-parent, and how do I speak to this person in a way that really highlights that role? 100%. Not, you always do this. Always do what? That's old stuff.
Right. We don't need to be doing that again.
No
always and
here.
nevers.
Otherwise you might as well have stayed married. You can't go back there.
Is there anything else particular to treatment for you, Dr. Rios, in terms of an identified patient in this story or treatment? You touched upon.
I think I've talked a lot about sort of the approach in using a systems approach, IFS approach. I think really just highlighting family strengths and resilience is an important piece for me, because I think there can be so much doom and gloom in a divorce that, and this doesn't mean sugarcoating it. I think that families that try to move on as if everything is okay and only focusing focusing on strengths can really hurt the system, because you have to grieve.
You have to feel
it's
it
a
all.
loss,
Absolutely.
right? And we're talking about trauma. We're talking about grief. We're talking about all sorts of things. And I think if you're only highlighting strengths and you're not really allowing yourself to fully feel. Now, there's a time and place, right? The parents can't rely on the kids to like sort of be a support system for them. They have to go do their own work. But I do think that highlighting strengths and resilience while also really being transparent about this sucks. You know, this is terrible, and you feel like your family's falling apart, because in some ways it is. Like it's
a
maybe
loss.
changing. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It is changing, and there's something good that can happen post-divorce. Like, for example, if your parents are miserable and they get divorced, and then each parent can thrive in a different relationship or even without a relationship, you know, that's something really positive for the kids to see. So having each parent really work on their own independent healing, I think, is something that really has to happen. Otherwise, you know, the kids are not seeing the benefit of the divorce. They're just seeing it as a trauma. It's something that, you know, destroyed everything.
Yeah, I'm of the firm belief that genuine, wholehearted, contented parents are better than married parents.
Agreed.
Like, because that is
Yeah.
the vibe
You
that
need
your
to be
kids
happy.
feed off of.
Yeah, you have to have the
Absolutely.
energy. You have to have the energy to be able to parent. And if you're depressed, which happens a lot when people get divorced, they get depressed, you know, and you're in bed all day and all of that. I mean, Miranda didn't seem to be doing that in the movie at all.
she
I'm sure
was a
she did that
type
for
A,
years
yeah.
prior before she made her decision. But, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, we see that a little bit with him
Yeah.
towards the end of the movie. But
Yeah, he definitely acts out his feelings onto his kids in a way that's not great, which we haven't touched. Well, we touched on a little bit, but I would say, just to kind of add to what you guys have all discussed, I know, I think, like, as a child therapist thinking about this, I was like, well, I don't know enough about any of the kids and there's like their presentation to even like pick one and know where that would go. I would say one thing I could offer up is kind of what we've all been doing, which is like just different interventions that can be really interesting to utilize in therapy that are a bit more play-like, which is another a cooperative exercise I like to do. I've done it mostly with kids in groups, but I think I would also love to do in a family system. Is we used to do this exercise, and I did this with like 5, 6, 7-year-olds. So where you have to do a picture, you have to draw a picture, and I would give every kid a marker, but they only could use that color, and they were the only ones allowed to use that color. So for instance, if I was I'll just make my name. If I was Sarah and I wanted blue for the sky, I'd have to ask Stu, who had blue, hey, could you draw up here for me? And so it requires giving away, like not being able to overmanage. So I think it could be good in this instance where there's overfunctioning, underfunctioning. I don't even know if I'd include the kids with this. I might have Daniel and Miranda do this, just the two of them, and be like, how would they do if they had to create a picture together where they only could control the colors they're in control of and like have to cooperate with each other, and she can't overcompensate for him and he can't undercompensate for her, like in order to create what I'm asking them to do. So I think that would be interesting. Another one too that I think is good to use with, it can be good, I've used with kids that I'm trying to kind of like feel out where they're at in terms of like their family dynamic without overtly getting there. Because you have to be really careful with little kids that you're not leading and projecting what you think they should be feeling or what you would assume they would feel. So something I would do is this thing, I can't remember what it's called. It's called the hinged house. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's where like you take like a folder, like a manila folder, and you put it in the shape of a rudimentary house, so it has like a hinge to it, and then I'd have the kids draw on the front like a house, and I wouldn't give any other direction. So it was the one, it'd be interesting which house they would draw. I've had kids draw the houses of before they were born. I've had kids draw the houses of like when their parents were married, when they weren't married, a grandparent's house. Inside, I would have them draw like what their house is like, and I would that's all the direction I would give. And on the back, I would say kind of, are like, can you like any like secrets in your house? And so that would usually help me. I would use that as kind of it's a starting point for kids because it's more creative and it's like drawing oriented. So they feel less, it's like assessing them without like just hitting them with questions, which they can't really do at that age. It's boring and they might not understand me. And 2, it helps me have a starting off point of like where their attention is. Like maybe they are more well adjusted and everyone's panicking. Like you were saying before, Dr. Rios, of like the kid having to go to therapy. Sometimes parents overcompensate with like they have to go to therapy to make sure that they're not
They
fucked.
sure do.
And so I could see like little Natalie being put in therapy at 5 because the parents assume that she's like fucked up from the situation. And I might give her something like Hinged House to get a better perspective of like, is it on her mind? Is it bothering her? Is she just thinking about kindergarten and like My Pretty Ponies and is moving on? Because your brain can be pretty resilient at that age.
Yeah, in the psychological testing world, there's a projective test that we give to kids and to adults, actually, that is like, it's called House Tree Person. And so that's one of the things that they do is they draw a house. So kind of what you were talking about. And, there's a series of questions that we ask that kind of get people to talk about things in that way.
Yeah. And so I think, with little kids, it's good to have something that you can do creatively. It's also good to have something that can be as open-ended as possible. So you're not leading them and assuming and projecting. And then also, it can just dictate where you go with treatment. And like you were saying, Hannah, before with like sculpting, like I see the inside of the house. Where is each parent at? And who's in this house? And what house is it? And so it just gives you a lot of information. And I've always found it to be a really good tool, especially with kids I'm working with who are more guarded. And like that, having more creative projects can be a good way to get in there. So that's kind of what I'm throwing out there as my part of treatment. So we can slide into final thoughts. I can have you go first, Dr. Rios. What are your final thoughts? Is just what are your, like, more, I was going to say secular. We're not religious, but I was thinking more like, more like your thoughts as a layperson about this movie, not so much as a therapist.
As a layperson, okay. Let's see. I remember watching this movie, almost 30 years ago, whenever it was. And I think it is very different to watch as an adult. I think we had kind of talked about this before the recording, but like sort of, how you feel as a kid, or a younger person watching this versus like when you're a little bit older and sort of in some of these roles in relationships yourself. I think it can really pull on different pieces. So I think it's a great movie to highlight some of the things that we talked about today. I had a lot of fun sort of thinking about it as a therapist and, just as a person, like, going into the world with different, and just all of the pieces of culture. And, I was even thinking just about sort of the cross-dressing and sort of how I think we talked about this too before the recording started. I just think it was a really interesting time, the 90s. And I think that, if they redid it today, they could have done it with even more insight and collaboration to, what that means and, really highlight strengths in that way for the cultural pieces of it. So I was just, I think it's a good movie to highlight some of those things that we're talking about. This was a great discussion. I'm really, really glad to be here and to have had this with all of you.
We're very happy to have you.
You added so much.
Absolutely. Agreed. It was fun.
Hannah, what are your final thoughts?
So this is a movie that I watched a lot as a kid. I think a part of that was having parents who were divorced multiple times. And so really feeling for the dad a lot more and feeling... So I just remember, again, it feels a lot different watching it as a therapist, especially a family therapist, and kind of sitting back and really getting a good look at some of the dynamics. And, but that just remembering that some of in terms of media in general, there weren't a lot of things that kids could watch about divorce. And so
it was very taboo.
Exactly. So like having a movie that was specifically about after the last scene of the movie, right? Like we're watching what happens to the family. We're watching the court happen. So this was a movie that I think as a family, we watched a lot. As an adult person, I probably still watch it once every couple of months.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
So, and that watching it, and that like always when I watch the movie as a therapist, it feels so different, and having such a different reaction to this movie felt kind of wild. And I think coming into this recording feeling very torn about what I wanted to talk about, and I think the way that it evolved just felt really helpful and really has kind of put me back to the place of I love this movie. I've loved this movie for a really long time. I love Robin Williams, and I'll probably continue to watch it on a somewhat regular basis just because it's such a big part of what my understanding was of what divorce could look like or even should look like.
Gotcha.
And really wanting some of the more positive aspects of the movie to be something that I could have experienced as a kid. So having something to even compare it to, again, missing a lot of the other themes of the movie, but like all of those pieces, like I was the oldest, the oldest sibling, and I was a girl. And so all of those, just all those different pieces. So I love this movie, and I'm sure that I'll watch it more.
I'll go next just because I think I'm going to have a more low note. And so I want to throw to Ben to have a more high note. To
Okay.
end it. I'm assuming, Ben.
Brittany is assuming I'm fun dad. That's what she's doing right now.
Well, because here's what I'm going to say is I haven't seen
Which
this
is true.
movie. Yeah, true. I haven't seen this movie probably since I was a kid. I couldn't tell you. It might have been like 20 some years since I'd seen it last. I think I came into the recordings today a little hot about it because I think watching it now as like an adult woman and as someone who's grown into feminist values as I've gotten older, I think it was hard to not look at this as like, oh my God, the 80s and the 90s always had this trope where the woman's such a fucking nag and the dad gets to be fun and then we're supposed to relate to him and he gets to like grow and we just forgive him and everything works out. And so I came in really like, I hate the perpetuation of that concept and that women can't be like fun and like that this like fun dad, which happens in real life too, and I think I've seen a lot too in the family work I've done of like that trope being carried out in like heteronormative relationships that I've been witness to. I couldn't speak to what it's like in non-heteronormative relationships, and so I think that really put me off of it. I found him so wildly unlikable the whole movie. I'm also thinking I'm realizing, which is why I wanted to not be the last one. I don't know if I like this brand of Robin Williams humor. This kind of like over the top, schlocky, like can't shut the fuck up was really driving me batshit. Like when he's doing the when he's in the studio by himself and he's doing all the dinosaurs, I was like, I need you to shut the fuck up. Like he was really, and I was like, I think I don't like this. And I was like,
The word we're looking
but
for
I
is
love,
manic.
But I love, yes, but I love Robin
Yeah.
Williams because I love like Jumanji and Hook's one of my favorite movies of all time. Like I think this movie is more like pure unadulterated Robin Williams, and I don't like his stand-up and stuff like that, so it makes sense. So I guess what I'm saying is I probably won't ever watch this movie ever again unless I just happen...
What? Hannah?
For real. Unless
do some
I'm not,
spots?
but I'm not saying I hate it. I just don't think I'll ever pursue it, like, and turn it on intentionally. If like I'm at like my siblings' houses and it's on TBS, like I'll sit down. I'm not gonna leave the room or anything. But I just feel like I didn't enjoy watching this movie. And that surprised me as someone who was really like Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, like this is a cornerstone. I was like 7 when this came out. I was like my sweet spot. So yeah, I just think like the schlockiness wasn't my jam. And then like how annoyed I was at his caricature and how that gets perpetuated societally just like rubbed me the wrong way. So that's just my thought on it. But I will say I appreciated this conversation as it really required me to be more flexible in what I was projecting onto this movie, and which I think is also really good about like these kind of discussions, and also why as a therapist you really have to make sure you get out of your own vacuum and that you collaborate and that you accept feedback from others that challenges you, because it helps you grow and think differently. And also like we all have blind spots in our empathy, and I think I was hitting one of those today. So it's always good to one, have that challenge to you, and then to accept that.
And not that this was like a clinical consultation hour, but that's the benefit of that,
Yeah,
right? Is because
absolutely.
everyone has their own system. Hannah was talking about hers. Like I have my own, you have your, everybody has their own family system that they're coming from. And it's going to have a direct impact on the way that you see people's presentations and who you align with. And so if you're trying to stay in a neutral party, you know, with clients, you have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So,
especially if you're doing like this work, like couples work and family work.
oh yeah,
and
it's like all it is like consultation all day.
And I think it's also important to know, like, I think what's also important too is you can acknowledge to yourself and maybe to colleagues, I don't like this one parent I'm working with, but that doesn't have to change the way that I support them or the empathy I can hold for them. Like, even I could work with Miranda and Daniel and actively not like Daniel personally, but I'm not his friend. I'm not his coworker. He's not in my personal life. That's not my role. And so you have to learn how to compartmentalize that to be a good therapist, in my opinion.
I agree with you.
All right, Ben.
Absolutely.
Take it home.
So, okay, so we make the Fun Dad movie back to Fun Dad. Okay.
Yep.
So I love this movie. I have always loved this movie. It always makes me laugh. I love Robin Williams, and even in his like manic episodes that are getting a little exploited in movies like this, where you just let like, and Robin, go.
Yeah.
Hey, how about Robin? Don't take your meds today when you come in to do the scene. And I almost feel like you see that a little bit, and I don't like that. I don't love that, knowing especially kind of like all the struggles that he went through that I wasn't aware of when I was a child, watching and enjoying all of the movies where like Robin was so fun and you see all these things, but you don't realize that there is a whole second side to that.
Yeah.
But I love the way that in every moment, in everything that he ever did, that you could see the passion for acting in everything that he did. You felt everything that he felt on screen. And I love that about him, and I love that about every movie that I see him in. And what I've loved about this movie, watching it again as an adult, and I don't think I've watched it again since like 94, maybe.
Yeah, same, probably.
I don't know that I've seen it in quite some time. You know, the fond memories of a kid of Robin Williams sticking his face in a pie and then walking
It's one of those
around.
things, you see so many vignettes of it,
Right.
and like references to it,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it makes you feel like you've watched it more than you have, or it makes me feel like that.
But I do appreciate this as like, I know I've harped on it, but an exercise in spontaneity and connecting to what makes you you, and using that to find your way forward after tragedy strikes in your life. And that is such an important message for people to take from in this movie. Even though it does suffer from some of the 90s tropes, I didn't see it that way. I saw, like, rather than Sally Field appearing as a nag, I saw her appealing as presenting as like, dude, you got to get it together and act like an adult. And I didn't see her painted in a negative light. And I don't remember her being in a negative light when I watched it, even as a kid. I remember like kind of going like, oh, Dad's really silly and Mom doesn't like it. But
I very much was sold and was internalized the narrative of Mom's a drag.
Yeah.
Mom's a drag.
Yeah,
And I think that
same.
sold a lot, is Mom's a drag.
and
fun.
it is, but I didn't get it from like this time I watched it going
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't feel like the undertones of the movie are like Mom was a nag. It was like Dad's a mess. And
Yeah.
it felt interesting watching it. I said off mic, it felt like a little bit of the shift that happens when you watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as a young therapist or as a younger person, a college student, and you watch that, and then you get a couple years in the field and you watch it again, and like your perspective on that man shifts so much. When people are like, you know, like, yeah, McMurphy, yeah, man, fight the man, and then you look back on it as an adult and you're like, nope, that's he is
No,
not
thank
well.
you.
He
No,
is
thank
not
you.
well. He is not. We should not be glorifying his behavior. This man is not well.
Yeah.
And like seeing kind of Robin have to get into the shift where he has to go like, okay, how do I be both fun dad and dad at the same time, like so that I can teach my children that there is a time and a place to let loose and be silly and spontaneous, but there's also a time where you have to fulfill the role society expects of you and do the things you're supposed to do. Otherwise, everything blows up and you put too much weight on other people. And I like the way that they danced that line and didn't let him get away with that he had to grow up to get through this. He had to go through growth to get to that point, and it wasn't just like Fun Dad is handed the full license to be Bananas Fun Dad.
Yeah.
That was not the way this movie ended. He had to balance, he had to grow up and recognize that he can both be that and be an adult, reasonable, sustainable parent that can provide structure for his children so they have a chance to grow up well. And I really liked seeing that in this movie.
I had one question for all of you, but was it intentional that we did this recording during National Suicide Prevention Month?
No.
Because I've been thinking about that as well. That's something that I didn't say earlier, but Robin Williams and his death by suicide, and just really, I think it's kind of very fitting that we're doing it in September. That is where suicide awareness is so prominent right now for a lot of therapists, but just generally. So I'm really glad that we did that.
Yeah, and on that note, if you are feeling in any way like hurting yourself, please immediately seek help. There are people out there. There's 4 of them talking to you right now if you're listening to this. And there are millions more like us that will help you get through that and help you tame your struggles so that you can move to a better place in your life. And please get help.
Yeah. So, Dr. Rios, is there anywhere where people can find you that you want to be found?
Sure. I mean, so, as I mentioned, my practice is called CORE, Center of Relational Empowerment. We're in Chicago and Evanston. We're a collaborative group practice. Dr. Amara Khalid and I founded the practice in 2012. So it's almost 10 years that we've been around.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
And we have a website. It's www.core-chicago.com. We also have a Facebook page. You can look us up by our full name. And I think I mentioned our Instagram earlier, but it's the handle core, CORE _psych.
Great.
So come find us. We do some fun things. And looking forward to staying in touch with all of you.
Yeah. And then, as always, you can find us at Popcorn Psychology on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at pop_psych on Twitter. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. That's the best place to give us recommendations for movies, or if you're wanting any immediate feedback from us, that's the best place to do that. And as we always forget to promote, we do have a Patreon. If anyone wants to, support us, you can find that. And typically it's the link in our bio of our Instagram, but also Patreon. If you Google Patreon, Popcorn Psychology, you'll find it right away. And we also have merch on TeePublic if anyone's interested in getting some of that. But so have a lovely day, and don't just, wear costumes if you have problems in life. Sometimes that's good, but also not always.